The morning mist clung to the rice fields like ghostly fingers, and I knew that death was coming for my family. My name is Takeshi Yamamoto, and for 43 years I have tended these lands with the devotion of a monk caring for his temple. These fields, passed down through 7 generations of my ancestors, have witnessed the rise and fall of countless seasons, countless rulers, and countless dreams. But never have they faced a threat as insidious as the one that now creeps toward us like shadows at twilight. It began 3 moons ago when my beloved daughter Yuki chose to marry Kenji, a masterless samurai whose honor shone brighter than his empty purse. In the rigid hierarchy of our Edo period society, where social order flows as precisely as water through carefully constructed channels, such a union was not merely unconventional, but potentially catastrophic. Yet love, as I have learned in my middle years, recognizes no boundaries drawn by man or custom. The wedding ceremony was modest, held in our family's humble shrine beneath the ancient cherry tree that my great-grandfather had planted. Kenji, despite his status as a Ronin, carried himself with a quiet dignity that spoke of noble blood and proper training. His swords, though worn from travel, were masterfully crafted, and his knowledge of classical poetry impressed even a local Buddhist monk who blessed their union. My wife, may her spirit rest peacefully, would have adored this young man, who made our daughter's eyes sparkle like morning dew on bamboo leaves. But in feudal Japan, personal happiness must always yield to the greater machinery of power, and power in our province belonged entirely to Daimyo Matsudara Yashineo, a man whose cruelty was matched only by his insatiable appetite for land and control. News of Yuki's marriage reached his estate within days, carried by the network of spies and informants that every wise daimyo maintains throughout his domain. The first sign of trouble arrived with the autumn tax collectors, men whose faces had grown familiar over decades of reliable service. But this year, they carried themselves differently, their eyes avoiding mine as they announced that our taxes had tripled overnight. The official explanation was bureaucratic nonsense about administrative adjustments and territorial reassessment. But I understood the true message immediately. This was punishment for my daughter's defiance of social order, a calculated assault designed to force us into bankruptcy and surrender our ancestral lands. Kenji, bless his samurai heart, offered to confront the daimyo directly, to demand satisfaction to the proper channels of honor and combat. But I am not a young man driven by hot blood and romantic notions of justice. For decades of farming teaches patience, observation, and the wisdom to recognize when direct confrontation leads only to swift destruction. Instead, I chose a different path, one that would ultimately reveal secrets dark enough to topple the very foundations of our provincial government. My investigation began in the most unlikely of places, the sake house frequented by the daimyo's lower-ranking retainers. These men, loosened by rice wine and emboldened by their modest positions within the hierarchy, often spoke more freely than wisdom would recommend. Night after night, I sat in shadow corners, nursing single cups of warm sake while listening to fragments of conversation that gradually assembled themselves into a horrifying mosaic of corruption and betrayal. The first revelation concerned the mysterious deaths of 3 other farming families whose daughters had married beneath their station over the past 5 years. Each family had faced the same pattern of increased taxation, financial pressure, and ultimate confiscation of their lands. But what struck me as particularly sinister was the fate of these daughters themselves. All had vanished within months of their family's ruin, their disappearances explained away as voluntary departures to distant relatives or tragic accidents. Armed with these disturbing patterns, I began to trace the ownership records of the confiscated lands, a pursuit that led me deep into the bureaucratic maze of provincial administration. Here, my years of patient observation served me well, as I had cultivated relationships with several low-ranking clerks who appreciated small gifts of premium rice and respectful conversation about their families and concerns. What I discovered in those dusty ledgers chilled my blood more thoroughly than any winter storm. The confiscated lands were not being absorbed into the daimyo's official holdings as tradition and law demanded. Instead, they were being secretly transferred to a network of merchants and traders operating far beyond the boundaries of our province, men whose names appeared in connection with the most unsavory elements of Edo's criminal underworld. But the true horror lay deeper still. Through careful cross-referencing of dates, locations, and financial records, I uncovered evidence of a systematic operation that violated not merely the laws of our domain, but the fundamental code of honor that supposedly governed samurai conduct. Daimyo Matsudaira was not simply a corrupt official skimming profits from his administrative duties. He was a mastermind of a human trafficking network that sold young women into the pleasure quarters of distant cities, their families conveniently eliminated or impoverished into silence. The evidence was overwhelming, yet I knew that presenting such accusations against a daimyo required more than merchant receipts and administrative documents. In the complex world of Edo period politics, where honor and face carried more weight than gold, I needed witnesses whose testimony could not be dismissed or silenced. This necessity led me to seek out the one person whose knowledge of the daimyo's activities might prove comprehensive enough to ensure justice. His own senior retainer, a man named Sato Ichiro whose conscience had apparently begun to trouble his sleep. Finding Sato required patience and careful maneuvering through the social networks that connected our farming community to the samurai class. My breakthrough came through an unexpected source, the local Buddhist temple, where Sato had recently begun making unusually large donations and requesting special prayers for the souls of the departed. The monks, bound by their spiritual obligations but not blind to the suffering of their community, provided subtle guidance that led me to a clandestine meeting beneath the full moon of the 10th month. Sato Ichiro was a broken man, his samurai bearing undermined by years of complicity in activities that violated every principle of Bushido he had sworn to uphold. When I presented my evidence and suspicions, his composure crumbled like autumn leaves, and the full scope of the daimyo's crimes poured forth in a confession that lasted until dawn painted the eastern sky. The human trafficking operation had been active for nearly a decade, targeting families whose social positions made them vulnerable, but whose daughters possessed a beauty and refinement that commanded high prices in the pleasure district of Edo and Osaka. The daimyo's method was consistently brilliant in its cruelty. Manufacture financial crises that forced families into desperation, followed by offers of assistance that inevitably led to the daughter's disappearance and the family's ultimate destruction. But Sato revealed something even more disturbing. The daimyo's activities had recently attracted the attention of the Tokugawa shogunate's secret police, the dreaded Onawaban, whose investigation was closing in on the network. In desperation, Matsudaira had accelerated his operations, planning to eliminate all potential witnesses and flee the province with his accumulated wealth before the shogunate's justice could reach him. This revelation transformed my personal struggle into something far more urgent. Yuki was not merely another victim in the daimyo's pattern of exploitation. She was potentially the final target in a deadly cleanup operation designed to erase all evidence of years of systematic criminality. Time, which had always moved at the steady pace of agricultural seasons, suddenly compressed into moments of desperate urgency. Working with Sato, who had finally found the courage to act according to his samurai principles, I began to compile a comprehensive dossier of evidence that could be presented directly to the shogunate authorities. This was dangerous work, requiring us to access the daimyo's private correspondence and financial records while avoiding the network of loyal retainers who would kill us without hesitation if they discovered our activities. Our breakthrough came when Sato used his position to gain access to the daimyo's personal chambers during a ceremonial trip to a distant shrine. Hidden within an ornate chest that had belonged to Matsudaira's ancestors, we discovered not only detailed financial records of the trafficking operation, but also correspondence with criminal organizations that revealed the scope of corruption extending far beyond our provincial boundaries. Among these documents was a letter that made my hands tremble with rage and fear, detailed plans for the elimination of my family, disguised as punishment for my daughter's inappropriate marriage, but actually designed to silence potential witnesses and acquire our strategically located farmland for use as a way station in the trafficking network. The letter specified that Yuki would be taken alive for special handling, while Kenji and I would be eliminated in a manner that would appear accidental. Armed with this evidence, I faced a choice that would define not only my family's fate, but my understanding of justice and honor in our complex feudal society. The proper course would be to present our evidence to the shogun authorities and trust in the official machinery of justice. But the documents also revealed that several officials in that very machinery had been compromised by the daimyo's gold, and any conventional approach might simply alert Matsudaira to our knowledge, while providing him opportunity to eliminate us before the truth could emerge. Instead, I chose a path that would have horrified my ancestors, but seemed the only viable option for protecting my family and ensuring justice for the countless victims of the Daimyo's crimes. Using Sato's connections within the samurai class, we arranged to present our evidence simultaneously to 3 different power centers: the local representatives of the Tokugawa shogunate, the Buddhist temple hierarchy that maintained its own channels of communication with Edo, and most crucially, the network of masterless samurai like Kenji, whose honor remained untainted by the corruption that had infected the official hierarchy. The confrontation, when it came, unfolded like a carefully choreographed dance of honor and justice that embodied the best traditions of our samurai culture. Kenji, supported by a dozen Ronin whose integrity had drawn them to our cause, formally challenged the daimyo to account for his crimes before assembled representatives of both secular and religious authority. The challenge was delivered at dawn in the courtyard of our provincial capital, following protocols that even the most corrupt official could not dismiss without losing face entirely. Matsudaira, trapped between the weight of evidence and the demands of honor, attempted one final gambit, claiming that his actions had been sanctioned by higher authorities as part of a secret investigation into criminal activities. But our documentation included correspondence that contradicted this claim, and the presence of the Onawaban investigators, who had arrived during the night like shadows given form, made any attempt at deception futile. The final revelation came when Sato, standing before the assembled crowd with tears streaming down his weathered face, produced the most damning evidence of all, a detailed legend in the daimyo's own hand that recorded not only financial transactions but personal observations about his victims. Descriptions so callous and dehumanizing that they stripped away any pretense of noble purpose or official sanction. Justice in feudal Japan, when it finally arrives, carries the weight of centuries of tradition and the sharp finality of well-forged steel. Daimyo Matsudaira Yashineo, faced with irrefutable evidence of crimes that violated every principle of samurai honor, chose the only path that might preserve some fragment of his family's reputation. Seppuku performed with a traditional ceremony that his ancestors would have recognized, his soul commended to whatever mercy the kami might grant to those who had strayed so far from the path of righteousness. The aftermath brought changes that rippled through our province like waves from a stone cast into still water. The trafficking network, deprived of its leadership and exposed to the full attention of the shogunate's justice, crumbled within weeks. The stolen lands were returned to their rightful owners, and the families who had suffered under Matsudaira's exploitation received compensation from his confiscated wealth. But perhaps the most significant change was subtler, felt in the way our community began to heal from years of fear and suspicion. Yuki and Kenji, their marriage blessed by adversity and proven through trial, became symbols of the possibility that love and honor might triumph over the rigid constraints of social hierarchy. Their first child, born as spring returned to our valley, carries in his eyes the promise that future generations might inherit a world where justice flows as naturally as mountain streams seeking the sea. As I write these words by the light of an oil lamp, my granddaughter sleeping peaceful in the next room while her parents tend to the evening prayers at our family shrine, I reflect on the lessons learned through months of fear, investigation, and ultimately justice. The Edo period, for all its beauty and cultural refinement, remains a time when individual lives can be crushed beneath the weight of institutional power. Yet it is also an era where honor, properly understood and courageously applied, retains the strength to topple even the most entrenched corruption. The rice fields that stretch beyond my window, bathed now in moonlight instead of the morning mist that began this tale, continue their eternal cycle of growth and renewal. They have witnessed the fall of a tyrant and the triumph of justice, and they will continue to provide sustenance for my family long after the details of our struggle have faded into legend. In their patient endurance, I find the same peace that has sustained my ancestors through centuries of change and challenge. Tomorrow, I will return to the work that has defined my life, tending the soil that connects me to both my past and my future, secure in the knowledge that sometimes, even in a world governed by rigid hierarchy and absolute power, the voice of a simple farmer can speak truth loudly enough to topple mountains and restore the natural order that heaven intended for all its